Welcome to the Inside the Blueprint podcast. This is a show led by marketing professionals here in Fort Collins, Colorado, covering news, updates, marketing trends, and other items relevant to the industry. If you're a business owner or a marketing professional or somebody who just wants to learn more about these categories, tune in. It'll be an awesome show for you. Nick, I'm excited to talk. We have a great dynamic. I expect lots of jokes and puns along the way. So we're probably just going to cover all things content today in the world of digital marketing for our Inside the Blueprint podcast. So maybe a nice broad question to open up with. What the heck is content?
Well, web content refers to anything that is really, it includes all forms of media on a website. But it also generally refers to written content, but it really doesn't just apply to written content. But that's what most people in the industry say. But outside the industry, people kind of don't really associate it with only words. So it's kind of interesting in that respect. People will, in the industry, they'll use content to refer to words, but they could also use it to refer to just kind of the totality of what's on the website. So that's images and other elements. The content of a web page isn't by definition just the words, but that's kind of how it's come to be understood, at least within the industry. But then there's also words like copy, which is more of on the ad side, which is kind of interesting. I've never really actually verbalized these thoughts, but I do find it really, really interesting that ad copy is copy and web content is content when it's just both words usually.
Sure.
We're referring to, but
there's no better place for brand new thoughts spewing out than a public podcast platform. I think.
Yeah. And I know you try to like hype me up, with the jokes and stuff like that, but you now ruined every joke that I might tell. So,
sure.
Thanks.
Well, let it flow. Anyway,
it's
continue.
flowing.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's content. It's not really something that is very restrictively defined.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to pick your brain a little bit because you've been at our company for almost a year now. And I've been intrigued by your process and the way that you're viewing content, especially, we'll get into this, of course, but AI and where things are going.
Right.
I appreciate your intentionality behind content going out, and that even a blog should not be something that's just force-feeding Google a bunch of things it wants to see. So a practical example I wanted you maybe to start with is, I think there was an article recently one of our writers put together, and the first paragraph or section was, what is a fire pit? And they were just explaining it. And your feedback to them was like, this isn't necessary. We're writing to a human. They know what a fire pit is. We don't need to shove in a bunch of keywords. This is a new age of where content's going. So could you unpack for me a little bit your thought process there and why, at least from my understanding, 10 years ago, you kind of needed that in a blog to pick up on some of those keywords, whereas there's this continued shift towards user experience.
Yeah, that's a good example, and it is a good question. And for me, it all goes back to audience. Marketing in whatever channel, digital, non-digital, if you're on social media, billboards, whatever, you need to know who you're trying to reach. And I think that a lot of businesses and even marketers kind of overlook that sometimes. And they just, especially in the digital landscape, it's easy to kind of get caught up in, what you want Google to pick out of a certain piece of content. And then the audience is kind of relegated, on that priority list. So when you write a paragraph like, what is a fire pit, you better be dang sure that nobody in your audience knows what that is and that it will be valuable to somebody. Will people get offended by it? No. I mean, I do, but, other people might just be like, I know what a fire pit is, but it's just kind of like wasted real estate where you could be talking about something more engaging, or you could be talking about features of your specific fire pits or unique benefits. So, when you have, a topic that's more generic like that you want to write about and, let's say rank for, I mean, you still need to think about who your audience is and who, what will they know, right? So another example is like an auto detailing website. I was just kind of working on this, so it's kind of fresh. But you know, if you are speaking to an audience of people who, you know, care about their cars, you know, and things like that. So you're not going to say, you know, you're not going to want to define, you know, very kind of common, you know, things, you know, like, you know, what's an engine bay, you know, I mean, these kinds of things, right? Like the people who are, you know, really car people are going to know all of these things. And, you know, if you're paying to have your car detailed, it's like, you know, you care a little bit more than like the average person who'll just run it through the, you know, like me, who'll just run it through the breeze through and snap off the stuff. And who cares? What was that? I don't know. You know, so that's just another example. It's like you want to be very careful that you're not, you know, accidentally patronizing your audience and kind of, you know, making them feel like it's like, well, yeah, okay, I know this. It's like, where's the valuable information? And Google's looking for that too. So it's not necessarily even serving Google anymore to kind of have those obvious type of, you know, definitive kind of paragraphs just to rank for, you know, generic keywords.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So in the world of writing, I did want to also, it feels like a natural tie-in with a lot of these pieces. Another insight you recently put on my lap or radar was even just comparing in your career where content started. And let's just use the timeline of 5 to 10 years ago versus even where it's at now. And we'll get to the future in a second. But you were making some interesting points about how you're approaching that and how you're analyzing and breaking down a content piece and whether or not it's going to be successful. Can you unpack that a little more of what that's looked like in, let's say, 5 to 10 years ago and where we are now, and just even whether it's blogs or page content, how much that's changed in your even philosophy now, what you're trying to get to?
Sure. Yeah, you can trace it, you know, in terms of, you know, overall kind of technological evolution, and also just specific things that Google has done on the algorithm side over the last 5 to 10 years that have kind of, the end result has been a devaluation of blog content. And, you know, part of the reason is that there's just way more multimedia options. There's way more options and channels to deliver content now. And so that just kind of naturally pushes the value down of something that used to be kind of just, you know, ubiquitous in terms of, you know, authority, you know, on the internet. Blogs are, of course, ubiquitous now, but there wasn't this level of saturation, too, that happened over time. I can get into that in a second. But 5 to 10 years ago, and actually I'll be more specific because it's important to be specific. So about 10 years ago, Google wasn't really operating on these, the algorithm, the search algorithm wasn't operating on this, you know, large language learning model. It was kind of just coming into it, but there were several key updates that they made to their search algorithm, which kind of made the previous strategy of just loading up your blog with keywords and your site with keywords and locations and all of that obsolete. They had a series of names for these, and forgive me because I can't recall all of them off the top of my head, but there was like, you know, the I think it was the Panda one, algorithm update. There was the helpful content updates. Basically, these all evolved into, they were all like animals initially, and then they evolved into just helpful content updates, and then another helpful content update. So now they're calling them like more helpful content updates. But that's essentially kind of like what they were in the beginning when they were naming all these animals. And we really should get those specific names. I bet Leanne knows those. But it's basically, as soon as that language learning model came in, Google began to contextually understand what's on your website instead of just looking for, you know, roofing, Fort Collins, these very kind of, you know, word for word, verbatim phrases and queries. That is how search really evolved, you know, and, you know, from the early days of, you know, Yahoo and Ask Jeeves and whatever other search engine you can remember, it was all about exact phrase match, right? You had to have the exact phrasing on your site. Well, as, you know, the technology became more advanced and Google's crawlers are able to read websites in a more contextual way, they're able to understand things like your business location. So it wasn't as important to be putting the location that you wanted to rank in 5, 6, 7 times on a page. There was definitely a transitionary period where that strategy was effective, and that's really one of the biggest challenges with content and SEO in general, is that even as new best practices are kind of crystallizing and forming, you still have these older, arguably more obsolete practices that are still getting some kind of results. And so you have groups of marketers who kind of cling to that because they know it works still, but it's really kind of on its way out. And it's tough to know when to really kind of go in with the new type of best practices, because you don't want to have results fall off.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get away from what works. But over time, over the last 10 years, every single update that Google has put out has been about understanding it has been about saying that it understands content in a more holistic, contextualized way. And it can read what's on your site much the way that a human would now. So what that's done is it is allowed for, in addition to the fact that blogs were a proven SEO tool, so those are going to necessarily kind of increase and proliferate across the internet because it's an effective tool. It demonstrates authority on behalf of a business, expertise and knowledge and all of that. It can rank for, those, we call them longer tail keywords, which are basically just like search phrases that not a lot of people are searching for, but they are valuable to the people that are searching. Those are people that are probably going to convert if they find the right information, these kinds of things. So as it became easier and more beneficial to write blogs, more blogs are written. Technology is getting better. Now we've got AI chatbots. You can write blogs. They sound great. They read great. They read very human. They're grammatically correct. We're well out of the early days of AI, text generation where, it's spitting out, nonsense and gobbledygook. It's really, most of what it says is very lucid, very fluent, grammatically correct. I kind of joke that, it's better than a lot of writers that have said they were writers that I've come into contact with, over the years and all of that. And then again, so what we're really pushing toward here is just mega saturation of blogs on the internet, all competing for the same sets of keywords in the same industries. And so how that changes, of course, it devalues blogs, right? Because now, to go back to your fire pit example, this is why that paragraph is even less valuable, right? Not only is it obvious and potentially patronizing to the audience, but it's also trying to compete for the words like, fire pit, which, I mean, a million other businesses are trying to compete for. They're writing blogs about, they're writing service pages about, they're writing product pages about, they're optimizing meta title for. So you've got to find what's, really, really unique about your business and try to have that shine through in your content. And, the tried and true is still just expertise and kind of like unique experience. Google has been really, really big as this algorithm has evolved and as it's been able to kind of, read better. It's been big on personal experience because it understands that is very valuable to users because it's obviously, if you're searching for fire pits, you'd rather maybe see somebody who has, built several different types of fire pits or knows about the materials in a way that, you didn't really see people trying to write about, 10 years ago. And it's all just kind of pushed by that, that necessity that there's too much out there. So I personally believe that we're kind of in the sunset of blogs, as a very valuable deliverable for many businesses. They are still going to be valuable for local businesses, for niche businesses. I'm not at the point where I'm not recommending to our clients, for instance, that they don't blog or that it hurts them in some way, because that's not true. Blogs are still helpful, but it goes back to what you said about being intentional. The pressure is that much more now to be intentional about your content because there's a billion other pages out there and they're trying to compete for the same keywords. And so what are you going to do? And at a certain point, you just can't really break through. And I think it's important to acknowledge limits like that. It's like, look, we can get some increase visibility with these blogs. We can maybe get some more traffic to your site. But if your goal is really getting in people and funneling people through for organic conversions, like, we're going to probably have to look elsewhere in terms of how we get that, or at least be more, comprehensive and holistic about how we get that organic traffic. And because it's marketing and the internet and Google, you still just don't know. You could write a blog that you just don't really think is going to do anything. And for whatever reason, everybody goes to it. Might not make your business a lot of money. And I have a very specific example in mind. We have a client who they're wealth managers out of Austin. And they have dozens and dozens of blogs that get barely any kind of activity or engagement. But one of them you could definitely classify as having gone viral, and it was an article about 5 celebrities who lost all their money, right? That's great that people are reading that, and this is actually what I told this client on the call. I was like, it's great that people are reading this and going to your website, but I'd be willing to bet that most of these people are not kind of contacting you for wealth management services. So you can create content that for whatever reason hits. That's the other thing about blogs is that you can create content that for whatever reason people love, they read, but at the end of the day, are they really buying your services and products because of it? So that's where the marketing connection becomes a little bit more obscure and challenging.
Yeah, that's really great. I appreciate the synopsis of where things have been, and even
I really wish I could remember those. I'm just blanking on every single one of those Google updates,
animals,
algorithm updates. But there was just really big ones that just transformed the way that that marketers did their job. And I want to add the other big element in here is Google Maps, the development of Google Maps and the advancing intelligence of Google Maps. I mentioned earlier that it was no longer necessary to, hammer your location all over your website. Denver's #1 window company, window replacement in Denver. You see all these sites. And when you see websites like this, these are like vestiges of like the old best practices. Yes, once upon a time, putting Denver in all your H2s, all your headers, gave you a really good shot to rank in Denver for things. Now, does it give you a shot? Sure. Does it sound really crazy and redundant, though, on the website? And will it, not really sound great to users? And it sounds kind of spammy? Yeah. So, now it's kind of hurting, your UX. And it's hurting your marketing on an entirely different front, right? That used to be like you put your location in your headers to rank for that, and it helped. But now it's like you do that, and it's like kind of cutting against your UX or your user experience. Users are just seeing Denver 100 times on your website, and they're just like, what? It's like they kind of get distracted from the services, and they're wondering why Denver is on your website 150 times. And I've talked to business owners who really don't like that either. They're just, some business owners are very particular about how their content reads and their site looks, and I can remember multiple instances where I did that optimization where, you put the location in a certain amount of times. That's how I was trained to do it. You put the keyword in a bunch of times and it kind of sounds all weird, like contact our Denver-based window contractors, which is actually a pretty decent way of saying it. There are way worse ways of saying it.
Right.
But even some business owners would bristle at that. Be like, what's up with this Denver thing? And we'd always have to kind of explain. But there's really no reason for anybody to do that anymore. It doesn't necessarily increase your chances, and it could hurt your chances at ranking. And the reason goes back to Google Maps and the development of the Google Business Profile, which has become one of the most important elements in digital marketing, SEO, even, on par with, a website. So because of the Google Business Profile being integrated into Google Maps, there's no longer this need to, throw your location in Google's face a bunch of times. It knows where you are. If you have your location on your website, Google knows where you are.
Yeah.
It's okay. You can relax.
They're like Santa Claus. They know when you're sleeping, they know when you're awake. They know you're in Denver as a window.
Well, they know when you're open and when you're closed. How about that?
Yeah. And they know you're in Denver. Denver, never, Denver.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been more about, optimizing the Google Business Profile, getting reviews, as opposed, as far as local rankings go.
Yeah.
So I just did want to mention that piece because it's a big piece of it, and it's a big reason why you why we always are pushing back against
Yep.
those old, because we have clients that come on from other marketing agencies that are still operating on best practices from 15 years ago.
Yep.
And they've got websites that have all this. And somebody told them, and
Yep.
you know, they don't know any better. They're a business owner. They hired marketing experts to tell them how to do it. And they were told that, hey, get your location in. We need this location in. We need these keywords in, you know, X amount of times. Otherwise, you know, it's going to be bad. And so we kind of have to like deprogram people,
Yep.
you know. But even, you know, there's the age-old debate about, oh, should you make a separate page? Let's say you're a window company and you want to rank, you're in Denver and you want to rank in Centennial. So you created a location page for Centennial. This was like the you know, where it talks about everything about your services, but just in the
Yep.
just towards Centennial. And Centennial is all over the page, and it's linked in some kind of nice way on your contact page or whatever. And that used to be the kind of tried and true strategy to like get rankings in very specific areas and communities where businesses wanted to rank, where they offered services and all of that. Well, now on the Google Business Profile, you can just select a service area, and you can include all those cities and those areas on your Google Business Profile. So the need and the effectiveness of location pages has also gone down drastically. Again, there are still select businesses that will benefit from it, but it's not this like, I mean, it used to be this just bread and butter,
Yeah.
you know, build location pages, blog about everything, you know, build microsites were a big thing where it's not another domain, this is not another website per se, but it's like a series of pages on your website that mirror all of the main pages, but they just are targeting different cities. And you'll see sites that have like thousands and thousands of pages, but a lot of them are just, you know, the service pages is rewritten 15 times for 15 different cities. Google is punishing that now.
Yeah.
And where they used to be rewarding it, you know. So that's another kind of example of kind of where we've come and you know, how things have kind of flipped.
Yeah, that's all really good, and I think it's probably set us up for now the jump into where we think things are going. I won't put you too much on the record, and you know we can just theorize. I realize you're not a fortune teller, but
Historian, actually the opposite.
That's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
you do the exact opposite. But history often mirrors the future, so that's something.
Rhymes.
So I wanted to pick your brain of starting to theorize where things are going, and maybe let me set this up a little bit. I realize I keep hearing people's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. I think that's overarchingly true, but when it's something intriguing and of value, I don't think that's true. And the reason I say that is some of the biggest podcasts out there, it seems like it's comedians, are 3 to 4 hour long form content that people are just consuming. And sure, they're multitasking and doing something else, but that was like a foreign concept a couple of years ago, or maybe 5-10 years ago. So I think there's certain things where the length can matter if there's value. And my setup to that was just simply going to be, do you feel like it's a fair synopsis based on what you're saying and what you're seeing, that if Google no longer needs to be force-fed these specifics, is the focus going to be a lot more on, is my content engaging, well catered to my audience, written well, clear, and more importantly, digestible? That's the word I always use of, if you have a whole bullet point of things, you can't just put it in a bullet point on your website. It has to be engaging. There should be icons, colors, formatting to draw me in and make it easy on the eyes. So as of right now, you know, if you had to predict a future, and even with where AI is going, do you feel like that's the direction of, there's just going to be the people who rise to the top are the ones who have a really critical understanding of who their user is and how to write and deliver for them?
Yeah. I think, you know, the overall media landscape has become so segmented and compartmentalized, and everyone just kind of goes to their own little sphere now. We used to call that the blogosphere. I think this has replaced, it's pretty obvious, this has replaced the blog,
Yeah.
right? Conversations, podcasting is the new blogosphere, you know. And as far as the future goes, in terms of written website content, which I believe is kind of the basis of the question, right?
Yeah.
Audience has always been critical to marketing and will always be critical, and even more so. And that is, again, because what I just mentioned, segmented media, people kind of choosing and picking what they want to consume, and there being unbelievably, you know, unparalleled assortment of offerings, for whatever you like. And so your goal as a business who's trying to attract, people who have all these options, are very picky about what they will dive into or pay attention to. You really have to get a sense of who your audience is and how do they like to consume things. And we can get a lot of that data from social media now. And that's kind of like always kind of back and forth with the privacy laws and all of that, because we used to be able to collect a lot more data right, on social media, and you used to be able to understand your audience, but was it ethical? I don't think so. So it's kind of oscillating. But in terms of if we just focus in on the AI created blogs, because that's what everybody is kind of freaking out about, AI created content, AI this, and the AI, the way it works, and this has been said on a bunch of different podcasts by a bunch of different experts, but the way it is now, ChatGPT, these generative AI bots can only work with what's already been produced and out there. Mm-hmm. They're not coming up with actual new concepts. They're reading, repackaging, reframing, maybe recontextualizing anything that's been out there that was written by a person previously. So there's always going to be a need moving forward, and I believe this even as the technology advances and can do, to the point where it might start to be doing research and all of that. But there's always going to need to be a human at the controls, QA, human to be there to check what's happening, making sure that it is registering with other humans, in particular the audience of the business or organization. So that's where my role has been. And we were speaking a couple days ago, and I mentioned that when I started this job, I used to do a lot of line editing, just a lot of grammatical correction, a lot of punctuation correction, really, flexing those muscles that I developed, as a journalist, writer, editor, all of that. And now it's become much, much more about the intent, the strategy, the structure of the content. Are the bullet lists annotated?
Right.
What are we saying? The quality of the information, which in my mind isn't a bad thing. For whatever reason, a lot of humans struggle with grammar and all of that, and I understand in English because English is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous. My daughter's learning to read and write now, and as she's doing that, I'm like, this language is horrendous. Like, there are no rules.
Yep.
We might as well just make up new words every day because it doesn't make sense anyway.
Well, all words are just made up anyway.
Well, they're all made up, but it's a mutual understanding, right? We agree that they mean something,
sure,
right? And we agree that there's a silent G.
Yep. Sometimes.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So in any case, now we don't have to worry about that. We got the AI, it writes grammatically correct, it has all this, but what we do need to worry about is, what it's saying, who it's speaking to, all the things you mentioned at the beginning of this question, in terms of, audience, relevancy, engaging, formatting, all the things you mentioned, those things are what Google is looking for. Mm-hmm. Again, because it's never been as mysterious as a lot of SEOs try to make it, because in my mind, and this is kind of my perspective as a content person coming into the SEO marketing industry, is that a lot of SEOs are just they're not word people, or they're not people who think with that part of their brain. And they want a one-to-one, they treat SEO as kind of a math equation. It's like, how do I solve for the algorithm? Well, you put these words in, and that was a lot easier when it was more kind of like that on a one-to-one, exact match search query. But it's not like that anymore. And so when Google comes out with these helpful content updates, a lot of these SEOs see their traffic to their clients' websites dip, which traffic is dipping all the time. It goes up and down. Yep. Rankings go up and down. And SEOs should know that anyway. But inevitably, whenever one of these helpful content updates come out, thousands of SEOs get on social media and they just cry Armageddon search is over, SEO's over, my clients got hit, this Google doesn't want us to do our jobs, Google this, Google that. And it's like, guys, if your content got wrecked by a helpful content update, it wasn't very good. Is basically the long and short of it.
Yeah,
it's just, it wasn't good. All right, you were ranking, congratulations. You managed to rank. But if your content is on such a flimsy footing as one algorithm update takes it out, you're not writing for users. You're not writing for people who want to know your expertise and experience. You're writing for Google. Google doesn't care about that.
Well, that feels like a good hot note that we could probably jump off, but maybe a good closing point too. So yeah, I think that's really good and should challenge people. I mentioned this example in my conversation with Amanda on the Beyond Business podcast last time, but Volvo to me has had a series of really powerful video ads, which is obviously content, but in a different form.
Yeah.
And they circle all of them just around a powerful story. And I think what I noticed out of these is either they spend zero time or wait until the very end to tell you why Volvo is great. And what they do is lure you in with a story that captivates you. So they did one 10, 15 years ago with Jean-Claude Van Damme, where he did his famous middle splits in between two trucks that were moving apart. And they don't tell you till the very end that they're testing the stability control of this new technology. And then most recently, I think it was this past fall or in winter, they got a lot of publicity around again, attention spans, in my opinion, are getting shorter, but it depends on what you're watching. I sat down and watched a 3 to 4 minute ad without blinking once because of this gripping story that pulls in how this couple gets pregnant and it's going to change their life now. And he starts dreaming about what his daughter could become. And his wife is walking around. And then there's this, I won't spoil it if you want to go look it up. I think it's called Volvo Life or something like that. But if you look up Volvo ad, it'll show up. But then at the very end, there's this climactic moment and it all leads up to Volvo talking about the new safety features of this vehicle and automatic braking with sensors. And it all ties back into, like, sometimes in life, the moments that don't happen are actually more important. And so I think I look at those things and I tie this into, again, to your blog point of if you're writing something that's 500 words, 1,000 words, 1,500, and it's not captivating, it should be punished. And it should be a challenge to, I think, lead with humility and say, how can I be better? Do I understand what my user wants? Is this something that deserves 500 words or 20 or 2,000? Again, because I'll read a good book. I'll sit down and read it. But if it's boring, I'm done and I'm moving on to the next one. You know, I want it to be captivating and speaking to something that will draw me in. Yeah.
That's great. I thought you were going to say that she gave birth to a Volvo, though. It's a Volvo.
That would be a twist. I don't think they'd say
I would have laughed at that commercial.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have bought a car, but
sure.
But
I should say I don't own a Volvo, but it's top of mind.
Yeah, I do. I think what you reminded me of is and we can close with this, but our wonderful in-house writer, who's all the way in Edinburgh, had this to say at the last meeting, and I thought it was very, very, very poignant and relevant to our conversation. And it's that human beings are narrative-driven creatures. We love a story. We want to be engaged. You know, we don't want to just have keywords.
Yeah.
Spoon-fed to us.
Yeah.
And Google knows that despite itself, and it will rank some weird stuff sometimes, and, you know, it's not perfect, but, you know, if you're writing for users and you're writing quality information, then, you know, Google's going to rank you higher.
Yeah. I guess on that note, to close, it feels like there's a promising age for writers, especially where you can maybe have more creative freedom now, where you don't have to worry about...
It's never been a promising age for writers.
I guess it depends.
That's just not a thing that exists.
Unless your name's J.K. Rowling. Anyway,
yeah, I suppose.
What I'm saying is more of, I think it's opened up, what I'm hearing is creative limits, and that you can now not to focus so much on keyword stuffing and more of how do I make an article about how to buy a fire pit really captivating. And I think that'll open up a lot of creative angles to draw someone in with a story or visual examples and bring them along for the journey that's intriguing. So
yeah, with some AI imagery where people have 5 thumbs and there's like the flames are pink or something.
Yeah. The fire is like on their head, but also
it's coming out of their butt or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, on that note, that feels like a good place to close. I think there's a lot more to be said here. So appreciate the insights and wisdom. I'm sure I'll be talking a lot more in the future, but I think this will be a good challenge for people to chew on.
Thanks. Yeah. And you know where to find me.
I always do.